All right, today we're going to talk about penguins. But, not just any penguins. We're talking about the stars of a film that completely took the world by storm, a documentary that became this massive cultural phenomenon. But here's the twist. This heartwarming story of survival, it also kicked off this fierce debate about what we're really watching when we watch nature. Are we seeing animals, or are we just seeing ourselves?
So let's start with a number that really tells a story all on its own. $110.7 million. That's the inflation-adjusted domestic box office for March of the Penguins. Now, to put that into perspective for you, this documentary about birds just waddling across the ice made more money than most Hollywood blockbusters. This thing wasn't just a movie, it was a genuine cultural moment.
But not everyone was a fan. I mean, just listen to this brutally honest take from critic Christopher Kelly. It's kind of jarring, isn't it? How could a film that captivated millions of people also provoke such a visceral, almost angry reaction? Well, that very question is the key to unlocking the much deeper story we're going to get into today.
So how can one little film about penguins create such a massive cultural divide? Okay, today we're going to unpack all of it. We'll look at why it became such a blockbuster, we'll dive into the fierce debate over anthropomorphism that it started, and we'll see how the film became this unintended messenger for all these different ideologies. Then we're going to shift our perspective and look at some other ways of telling nature stories. And finally, we'll ask, what does this all mean for how we watch nature?
Okay, first up, we really need to understand that the success of March of the Penguins was no accident. It was absolutely the result of some very specific and honestly very clever storytelling choices that turned a documentary into a full-blown drama.
Right, and Adam Leipzig, who was the president of the film's distributor, was surprisingly blunt about their strategy. They were not selling a science lesson. As he put it, people don't go to the movies to eat their vegetables. They go for an emotional journey. So what did they do? They zeroed in on the most human elements they could possibly find: love, family, romance, and they built the entire film around them.
And, this transformation was a totally calculated move. The original French version was actually even more whimsical. It had actors giving voice to the penguins' inner thoughts, but for the American release, the distributors made a pivotal decision. They silenced the talking penguins and brought in, well, the voice of God himself, Morgan Freeman. That one single change transformed the film from, a quirky fable into something that felt profound, objective, and almost biblical in its authority.
And that decision, the choice to frame the penguins' brutal struggle for survival as a relatable human drama, that brings us right to the heart of the whole controversy.
The central idea here has a fancy name: anthropomorphism. It's that thing we all do when we look at our dog and say, "Ah, he's smiling." Or we see two trees kind of leaning on each other and think, "Ah, they're in love." We just can't help but see ourselves in the world around us. And March of the Penguins leaned into this human tendency harder than maybe any nature documentary before it.
This is where the debate gets really fascinating. You have the exact same footage, but two completely different realities. The film, guided by Morgan Freeman's incredibly comforting voice, presented a love story of family, monogamy, and triumph. But critics? They looked at the very same images and saw something else entirely. A brutally difficult and pointless existence. A Sisyphean study in meaningless suffering, acted out by what they saw as just inexpressive creatures. Two warring interpretations, pulled from the exact same frames of film.
So for critics, this wasn't just creative storytelling, it was what they called crude anthropomorphism. The argument was that by forcing the penguins into this human-shaped box, the film was, as one scholar put it, a way of not seeing animals in their own right at all. It wasn't about understanding penguins anymore, it was about using them to teach human moral lessons.
And those choices, they had very real and some very surprising consequences. The film's seemingly objective, authoritative style turned these poor penguins into a kind of cultural Rorschach's test, where all these different groups just saw a reflection of their own deepest beliefs.
Yeah, by presenting its story as this objective truth, the film became a blank canvas. For some people, it was this beautiful affirmation of traditional family values. For others, it was literal proof of intelligent design, evidence of a divine hand at work. It was even co-opted to support conservative gender roles. And then you have critics like Philip French who saw something else completely, an existential nightmare, a story of creatures just trapped in this meaningless cycle of suffering. This quote from commentator Michael Medved just perfectly captures how the Christian right embraced the film. They saw the penguins' behavior not as animal instinct, but as a divine blueprint for how we humans ought to live.
The filmmakers might have been selling a love story, but for a huge part of the audience, they were watching a sermon.
So, if that traditional voice of God approach is so fraught with peril, what's the alternative? Is there a way to connect with animals on an emotional level without just turning them into furry, feathered versions of ourselves? Well, it turns out there is, and it involves a pretty fundamental shift in perspective.
So first, let's put a formal name to the style we've been talking about. It's called the expository or voice of God mode. It relies on a narrator who seems all-knowing, totally neutral, and detached. The effect is really powerful. It implies that what you're hearing is the absolute objective truth, and it totally hides the fact that a human being with their own biases is the one who wrote the script.
Now, contrast that with the first-person documentary. This style does the complete opposite. Instead of hiding the human behind the camera, it puts them front and center. The filmmaker uses I, they acknowledge their presence, and they frame everything as their own subjective, personal, and maybe even biased experience. It makes the filter totally transparent.
So what does this actually look and sound like in practice? Well, the best way to understand the difference is to compare two films that use the exact same footage of those emperor penguins.
On the left, you have Morgan Freeman making this grand, definitive statement about the penguins. This is a story about love. It's just presented as fact. Then on the right, you have narration from Of Penguins and Men, which was a making-of documentary. Here, the filmmaker Jerome Maison isn't telling us what the penguins are. He's telling us how he feels watching them. I'm so moved, my hands are shaking. One is a judgment, right? The other is a confession. The focus shifts from the animal's supposed inner life to the human's documented emotional reaction. And here's the crucial point. When the filmmaker is an open character in the story, they carry the emotional weight. Take the incredible documentary My Life as a Turkey, where a naturalist literally hand-raises a flock of wild turkeys. The film isn't really about turkey society. It's about his experience, his wonder, his heartbreak. The story becomes about the human-animal interaction, which allows the animals to just be animals. This reduces the need to invent some human-like soap opera for them to act out, letting the two stories coexist without one overriding the other.
So all of this brings us to the big takeaway. It's not necessarily that one style is inherently good and the other is bad. It's really about being aware of the choices being made for us as viewers and developing a more conscious way of watching.
Eco-critics actually offer a way forward here. It's a concept they call critical anthropomorphism. And look, it's not about refusing to use human terms to describe animal behavior. That's pretty much impossible. It's about using them with a healthy dose of self-awareness. So instead of saying the penguin is in love, we might say the penguin's behavior is consistent with what we call love in humans. It's a small change in language, but it's a huge shift in perspective. It allows us to connect emotionally while still respecting the fundamental mystery of the animal's inner world.
Ultimately, the story of March of the Penguins leaves us with this essential question. These films are powerful mirrors. They shape our understanding of the natural world, for sure, but they also reflect our own values, our anxieties, our desires. So the next time you settle in to watch a stunning nature documentary, remember the penguin in the mirror and just ask yourself, what am I really seeing?